The stars were dying, one by one, as though some vast cosmic hand were pinching them out of existence. Across the black expanse above Astraeon, embers of distant galaxies flickered like the last breaths of ancient titans. The air itself felt heavy, as if the world were holding its breath, waiting for a truth too immense to speak. You can feel it too, the hush before an age ends, the quiet that comes when history knows it is about to remember something terrible. And before we continue, know this: we truly love and care for you, the listener who walks with us now through memory and ruin. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now let's get started. The observatory spire rose like a needle of white stone piercing the dimming heavens, illuminated by the dying star that once bathed Astraeon in warm gold. Now its light was thin and cold, stretched across the horizon like a memory. Lyrian Vale stood at the highest balcony, his cloak whispering in the dry wind. He had watched this sky for 2,000 years, through cycles of glory and famine, of triumph and despair. The immortality that had once been his gift had long ago soured into a weight he carried with a quiet, solemn dignity. To live forever was not to escape death, only to witness it endlessly in others. From this height, the capital city of Orelon sprawled in gentle curves of marble, gardens and sky bridges, beautiful still, but aging. The voices of the people below carried upward in a distant hum, full of life that now trembled beneath the shadows stretching across the stars. The astronomers had confirmed what Lyrian had seen with his own eyes: a cosmic mass, a devouring migration of living organisms the size of continents, drifting in perfect silence between systems. The swarm. Its movement was not chaotic but deliberate, driven by instinct older than memory, older than suns. Entire sectors had already vanished in its wake. A courier approached him quietly. The boots clicked softly on the stone floor, but Lyrian did not turn until the young man bowed. "My sovereign," he said, voice tight with suppressed dread, "the council awaits your judgment. They say the people grow restless. Rumors spread. Rumors. Fear takes root faster than truth." Lyrian dismissed the messenger with a gentle nod. His gaze lingered on the sky a moment longer, on that approaching darkness, a presence that evoked both awe and horror. There was no malice in it, no cruelty, only a purpose so absolute that it made every belief in freedom seem small. When he descended the tower, the halls of the spire echoed with memory. Paintings lined the walls, each capturing eras he had lived through. He saw his own face in many of them, unchanged though centuries had passed. There were others too, those he had loved, guided, and buried. Their eyes, immortalized in pigment, stared back with the warmth of long-vanished laughter. Immortality did not grant immunity from grief. It only ensured there would always be more of it. The council chamber was full when he arrived. 12 seats of carved stone circled a central dais. The voices were already raised, fear twisting reason into something sharp and brittle. "Evacuate the outer districts. Shut down trade routes," cried one chancellor. "No, prepare the fleet. We must meet this enemy in orbit before they reach our skies," shouted another. "It is not an enemy," a third whispered, trembling. "It is something beyond war. You cannot fight the tide." Lyrian stepped into the center, and silence settled like dust. "We stand at the edge of an event older than language," he said, his voice calm, almost soft. "The swarm does not bargain in hatred or conquest. It moves because it must. It consumes because it must. To fight it without understanding is to throw our lives into the abyss." Across the room, a single figure rose slowly. Arkansas, younger than Lyrian, sharp-eyed, brilliant and restless. He had long been regarded as the Empire's brightest strategist, but there was hunger in him, a yearning for a legacy Lyrian feared. "You speak as though surrender is wisdom," Arkan said. "I say it is cowardice. The people need strength. They need victory. They will not follow a ruler who kneels before an approaching darkness." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Lyrian did not look away. Strength is not always found in the sword. Sometimes it lies in surviving what cannot be defeated by force. "That is not survival," Arkan replied. "It is servitude." The two locked eyes. A fracture, small but deep, formed between them. The council dismissed soon after, with no unified plan. Lyrian stepped out into the open courtyard where dusk painted the city in muted gold. He needed air, space, silence. That was when he felt her presence. Serene veil, his chosen heir, not of blood, but of trust. She approached with slow steps, her expression soft, though shadowed. Her dark hair was tied in a ribbon, her eyes deep with thought. "You're troubled," she said quietly. "Troubled implies uncertainty," Lyrian replied. "This is something heavier." She joined him, both of them watching the horizon, where the last rays of the fading sun stretched thin. Serene had always been curious, gentle, yet unafraid to challenge him. He valued that. "Do you think we can reason with it?" she asked. He hesitated. She watched that hesitation shape itself in his silence. "There is no reasoning," he finally said, "but there may be understanding. And understanding may be the only bridge between life and extinction." Serene lowered her gaze. "And if understanding demands we become something less than ourselves?" He breathed out slowly, the air cold against his lips. "Then the question becomes, is living worth more than remembering who we were?" The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy with the weight of futures not yet written. Below them, the city lights flickered alive one by one, small constellations mirroring the dying sky. Life continued, unaware of the cosmic hunger moving ever closer. Serene touched his hand, not as heir to sovereign, but as someone who saw the man behind eternity. "You've carried this world a long time," she whispered, "but you do not have to carry it alone." For the first time in years, Lyrian closed his eyes and allowed himself to feel the sorrow of someone who has lived too long. The dying stars' light flickered across their faces. The swarm, still beyond sight, drew nearer, and Astraeon's fate began to turn. Night settled over Orelon in layers of quiet silver light, the city's marble structures reflecting the melancholy shimmer of a fading sky. The last rays of the dying star stretched across the spires and arches like fading threads of memory. Lyrian walked slowly through the inner gardens of the palace, the weight of the council's division lingering like frost in his thoughts. Trees with crystal-veined leaves rustled softly as a cool wind drifted through, carrying the scent of night-blooming flowers that had opened under starlight for thousands of years. He had planted some of these himself, centuries ago, before the wars, before the rebuilding, before the long silence of peace, before immortality felt like a burden. Serene walked beside him, her steps measured and quiet, yet her presence full of unspoken questions. A single lantern hovered above them, gliding on quiet gravitic currents, casting gentle warmth across the path. The palace gardens were empty at this hour, giving them solitude, but the silence between them was not comfortable. It was charged, gentle, but edged with a growing tension. "You didn't deny him," Serene said finally. "Arkan spoke against you in front of the council. He called you weak. and you said nothing in return." Her voice was steady, but her eyes searched him for meaning. "Power does not always require an answer," Lyrian replied. "Sometimes silence reveals more than words. But silence can be taken as surrender," she said. "The council listens to perception more than truth. They see strength in fire, not in restraint." Lyrian paused at the base of the ancient fountain. Water trickled down smooth stone carved into the forms of figures long forgotten by history. Heroes, rulers, lovers, enemies. Time wore all identities away. He touched the edge of the basin with thoughtful fingers. "There was a time," he murmured, "when I believed strength could be shown by raising armies, commanding fleets, conquering systems. That belief cost us more than centuries of peace can ever repay. Now I know. The strongest act is sometimes the one that allows the future to change." Serene stepped closer, her expression firm but not unkind. "But what future are we changing toward if the swarm comes and we surrender ourselves to it? You speak of understanding, of coexistence. But coexistence with something that consumes everything it touches is not survival. It is dissolution." He heard fear beneath her words, not fear of the swarm, but of losing what Astraeon was. A culture, a memory, a way of being. Something precious and personal, something built from laughter and shared history and fragile human time. "I do not intend to surrender," Lyrian said softly. "I intend to learn, to see what has driven this cosmic force for eons, to understand if there is a way to live beside inevitability. Every empire has believed itself eternal. Every one has fallen. But perhaps it is not empire that must survive. Perhaps it is us." Serene looked away, the lantern light catching the faint scar beneath her left eye, an old wound she never spoke of, from a life before he chose her. "You speak as though you are willing to become something less than human." Lyrian's voice was barely a whisper. "I already have." The words hung between them, heavy, true, and full of pain. Serene's gaze softened. "I know immortality has shaped you. I know you have seen more falls than the rest of us can imagine. But I need to understand what you truly fear. Is it the swarm, or time itself?" Lyrian closed his eyes briefly. He remembered faces, smiles, last breaths, hands that had once touched his, promises whispered and broken by the march of years. Immortality was not a gift. It was a slow erosion of identity through grief. Every attachment became a future wound, every love, a countdown. To be eternal was to be alone, no matter how many gathered around you. "I fear losing this world," he said at last, his voice quiet. "Not because it cannot be rebuilt, but because it is the last thing that still feels alive to me." Serene's breath caught. For the first time, she saw the depth of his exhaustion, not just physical, but spiritual. A man who had lived too many goodbyes, and yet love still lived in him, enough to fear losing his home. A bell sounded in the distance, soft, melodic, signaling the changing of the watch. Guards passed along the perimeter, their footsteps echoing faintly through the stone corridors. The night remained calm, but tension hummed through the air like a string pulled too tight. They continued toward the library wing, where ancient star maps and records were kept. Serene brushed her fingers along the carved reliefs in the hallway wall, depictions of Astraeon's history unfolding in slow progression. The founding of the first city, the starship expeditions beyond their system, the wars of unification, and finally, the age of Lyrian's reign, years of peace that poets still sang of. "You chose me," Serene said quietly, her hand pausing over one of the carvings. "Not because of blood, not because of tradition, but because you believed I would lead with compassion. if you believe in that compassion now, why not trust me with the truth? What do you intend to do when the swarm reaches us?" He turned to her, and his eyes, old, deep, carrying millennia of memory, met hers with a vulnerability so rare it startled her. "I intend to speak to it," he said, "directly. Not through emissaries, not through scholars or generals. I will reach into the mind of the swarm myself, and if I can understand its hunger, perhaps I can alter its course." Serene felt the air leave her lungs. "That could kill you." Her voice was soft, but the fear in it was unmistakable. "It may," Lyrian agreed. She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "If you die, this world loses more than its ruler. It loses its history, its memory, its guiding hand. It loses the balance that kept peace alive. And her voice halted, caught on emotion. "And I lose the person who believed I could be more." Lyrian reached out and rested a hand on her cheek, his touch gentle, warm, human. "I did not choose you so that you could follow. I chose you because you would question me. Because when the world changes, someone must be strong enough to challenge what even I would accept." She closed her hand around his wrist, grounding herself in the warmth of the moment. "Then let me stand with you," she whispered. "Do not face this alone." But Lyrian shook his head slowly. "I will not risk the air to astray on. If I fall, you must rise. That is how worlds endure." Serene's eyes filled, but no tears fell. She was stronger than that. A distant tremor rippled through the ground, barely noticeable, but unmistakable. The first sign. The swarm had entered the system. A slow, thrumming resonance filled the air, like a heartbeat from beyond the stars. The world was changing. Serene stood perfectly still, her breath steady, the lantern casting flickers across her face. "Then we no longer have time to argue," she said. Lyrian nodded. The night around them felt like the last twilight before an eclipse, and together they turned toward the palace gates, where fate awaited. The tremor that passed through Astraeon was subtle at first, no more than a shiver beneath the marble foundations of the palace, but Lyrian and Serene both felt it as something deeper, like a note struck at the base of the universe itself. The swarm had entered the outer system. The astronomers' warnings had transformed from theory to presence. The sky had not yet changed, but the air seemed to hold its breath. The world waited. They walked together through the palace corridors toward the council chamber, where the 12 representatives of Astraeon's many provinces gathered once more. The hall was alive with murmurs, soft but charged with urgency. No one spoke louder than they had the night before, but there was a new edge now, a trembling awareness that time had narrowed to a single path. The city outside still glowed with its night-lit beauty, but the lights felt fragile, like candles flickering before a storm. When the tall doors opened, all conversation ceased. Lyrian stepped into the chamber, his long coat sweeping across the polished stone. Serene followed beside him, not behind him. That subtle shift did not go unnoticed. Eyes watched, some with hope, some with calculation. The council table was a circular structure of pale bone-white stone, smooth and ancient, carved in the era before Lyrian's rule. Its surface etched with constellations and planetary orbits, a reminder that their world had once reached for the stars with curiosity instead of fear. Now those same stars seemed to draw closer, like witness bearers to the decisions made within this room. Archon Saul stood already, hands pressed against the table's edge. He looked tired, though not in body. His tension lived behind his eyes, restless and hungry for action. His dark hair fell across his brow, giving him a youthful fire that drew attention effortlessly. "The disturbance has been confirmed," Arkan said, before Lyrian even reached his seat. "The swarm is within the boundaries of our outer stations. They did not slow. They did not respond to transmissions. They simply moved onward, exactly as they have done everywhere else." The representatives murmured, fear shaking through their voices like frost breaking along glass. Lyrian raised a hand, not to silence them harshly, but to bring the room into quiet alignment. His voice, when he spoke, was measured. "We knew this moment would come. The question before us now is how we will face it, with desperation or with clarity." Arkan's eyes flicked to Serene, then back to him. "Clarity does not mean inaction. If we wait too long, we will lose the skies. The ships must be armed. The orbital platforms must be readied. If we act now, we can meet them before they reach the heart of our system." "And be devoured in orbit," Lyrian replied. "You know what happened to the Hellerin Confederacy. Their fleets were consumed piece by piece. Their weapons were absorbed and repurposed. To fight them without understanding is to feed them stronger versions of ourselves." The reminder of that tragedy settled over the room like ash. The Hellerin were not so distant in memory. Only 2 generations ago, their star system had gone dark in silence. A counselor with silver-threaded hair and pale, trembling hands spoke up, her voice almost pleading. "So what do you propose, Sovereign? If war is futile and surrender is death, what path remains?" Lyrian breathed out slowly. "We open the conduit for direct communion." Several council members stiffened. Others recoiled as though he had spoken blasphemy. Arkan's voice was sharp, incredulous. "You intend to speak to it, to touch the mind of a hive that has no individuality, no compassion, no concept of identity. To open your mind to it is to allow it to open itself into you." Serene felt the tension in the air sharpen like a blade. Her heart tightened, but she held still. She had known this was coming, but hearing the words aloud made the risk more real. "That is why I will be the one to make the connection," Lyrian said. The council erupted. "Unacceptable. You cannot. The entire balance of leadership. If the sovereign falls, what of stability?" Arkan slammed his palm on the table, and the chamber cracked into silence. "You would risk the entire identity of this world on your arrogance," he said, his tone controlled but burning. "You claim caution, yet your plan is reckless. If the swarm consumes you from within, we will fall without a fight. We will crumble from our core." Lyrian's gaze was steady. "You assume I make this choice lightly." Arkan stepped forward, voice lowering into something intimate and cold. "I assume you have grown tired. I assume you seek an end to your burden and are dressing it in the language of sacrifice." The word struck something inside Lyrian. Not anger, but a grief that had no sound. He did not respond immediately. Serene stepped forward, her voice clear and steady. "Arkan, enough." He turned to her, disappointment flickering in his expression. "So you stand with him?" "I stand with Astraeon," she said, "but I will not twist loyalty into obedience. If we are to make decisions that risk all we are, we must weigh them without poison." Arkan stared at her, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them. History, perhaps, or a shared beginning before paths diverged. Then he exhaled, tension leaving him like steam from cooling metal. "What if the link is attempted?" Serene said slowly, "but under controlled conditions. In the presence of our strongest shieldcasters, our mental warders, our psionic anchors. If something begins to go wrong, they sever the connection instantly." The council considered. The silence was thoughtful this time, not fearful. One by one, heads nodded. The compromise had shape. Arkan spoke again, but his tone had shifted. And if the swarm does not communicate, if it consumes the signal, if it attempts to infect the mind of the sovereign and breach the psychic network, Lyrian answered quietly, "Then I trust Serene to take command in my place." The chamber froze. Even the air felt still. Serene's breath caught, not because she was unprepared for the responsibility, but because he had spoken it aloud, made it real, undeniable. Arkan's jaw clenched. His voice softened into something deeper, more wounded. "You always intended for her to take your throne." Lyrian did not flinch. "Estrayon must outlive me. Whether I fall to time or to the swarm, I have always known that one day I would not be enough." The council spoke no objections. The decision was sealed, quietly, solemnly, like a vow spoken before the bones of ancestors. The final arrangements began at once. The meeting adjourned in fragments, councillors whispering rapid instructions to aides, orders cascading through the palace, through the city, through the planetary network. Dockyards stirred awake. Shield casters lit incense in preparation for psychic anchoring. Astronomers aligned the great lenses. The temple bells rang once, a sound that travelled across the entire capital, a soft chime signifying not war, but preparation for something irreversible. Lyrian remained in the chamber after the others had gone. Only Serene stayed with him. They stood together beneath the vast mural that adorned the ceiling. The galaxy, as it was recorded long before the swarm, depicted in colours that no longer existed in living memory, stars brighter, worlds untouched, dreams unbroken. "Do you regret it?" Serene asked quietly. Lyrian took a long breath. "Regret is the shadow of love. I regret everything worth remembering." She did not look away. "I am not ready," she said, "but I will not fail." He placed his hand over hers, no longer sovereign and heir, but two souls facing a horizon they could not predict. "You already carry what this world needs," he said softly. "Not certainty, compassion." Outside, the wind shifted, far beyond the atmosphere, invisible yet vast. The swarm drifted closer. The first communion would begin at dawn. Dawn broke slowly across Estrayon, the light dim and pallid, filtered through a sky that seemed thinner than it had been the day before. The dying star cast a wan glow across the horizon, as though reluctant to rise at all. The city below stirred in uneasy quiet. There were no morning markets today, no lively chorus of voices echoing between the marble walls. Word had already spread through the capital. Today was the day the sovereign would attempt to speak with the swarm. It was a moment that would be remembered in the chronicles of their world, whether as salvation or as the first note of extinction. Lyrian walked through the citadel hall toward the sanctum of resonance at the heart of the palace. The sanctum had not been used in centuries. Its architecture was unlike the rest of the city, older, carved of smooth black stone veined with faint silver, as if starlight had been frozen inside the material. It had been built during a time when Estrayon still believed in communion with the unseen forces of the cosmos, a time before wars taught them to fear the unknown. Serene walked beside him once more, silent but steady. She had slept little, though her face did not show exhaustion. Instead, she carried an intensity that seemed to grow with each step. Lyrian felt her presence like a steadying force beside him, though he also sensed the conflict that stirred deep within her. Her loyalty had not wavered, but fear had roots now. Not fear of failure, fear of what survival might cost. Arkan waited inside the sanctum along with the shieldcasters and psychic warders. He had not spoken to Lyrian since the council meeting. His expression was controlled, jaw tight, his posture ramrod straight. He held the stance of a soldier prepared to witness something he could not support but could not prevent. The sanctum chamber was circular, with a single elevated platform of pale stone surrounded by carved channels like rivers branching from a central source. These channels, Serene knew, would guide psychic energy when the ritual began. Above the platform hung a suspended ring of polished crystal, its facets capturing and refracting the thin morning light into shifting fragments across the stone floor. The air was cool, and a faint hum resonated through the walls, as if the chamber itself anticipated what was to come. The chief shieldcaster, an elderly woman whose eyes were clouded with age, but whose presence radiated quiet strength, stepped forward and bowed to Lyrian. The anchors are prepared. The psychic channels are open. When you take your place at the center, we will begin the weaving. Lyrian inclined his head. Thank you, Elira. Serene looked at the woman. She had known Elira since she was a child, when Lyrian first brought her into the palace. Elira had always been patient, always calming, always steady. Seeing her hands tremble faintly now made Serene's chest tighten. Arkan stepped forward, speaking quietly so only Lyrian and Serene could hear. If this fails, the damage may not be contained. The swarm's consciousness could breach beyond you. It could consume or corrupt the anchors. We may not be able to sever the link in time. Lyrian met his eyes calmly. I am aware. You should choose someone else, Arkan said, voice low but fierce. Someone who is not the heart of Astraeon's stability. Someone who is not the axis around which this world turns. I chose myself, Lyrian replied, for that very reason. Arkan's jaw tightened in frustration. There was anger in his expression, but beneath it, concern. Not for the plan, not even for the city, for Lyrian himself. Serene watched the exchange, feeling the subtle undercurrents between them. Two men who had once stood as allies, now divided not by loyalty, but by interpretation of duty. Lyrian stepped onto the central platform. The crystal ring above shifted its light into alignment, creating a column of pale radiance that enveloped him. The shieldcasters moved to their positions around the chamber, forming a circle. Their hands rose, palms outward. Elira raised her staff of pale wood and struck the ground once. The sanctum came alive. The channels carved in the floor glowed faintly, threads of light pulsing outward like veins. The chamber's resonance deepened, a low hum that vibrated through bone and blood. Serene walked to the secondary command dais, where she could monitor the psychic web and, if necessary, issue the order to sever the link. Arkan took position opposite her, hands already poised above the fail-safe mechanism. An emergency psychic breaker designed to collapse the entire network instantly. If triggered, it would also likely destroy the minds of the shieldcasters. The weight of that knowledge hung between them like the blade of a guillotine. Lyrian closed his eyes. The ritual began. A current of mental energy rose from the floor, surrounding him like invisible wind. The chamber darkened, not because the light dimmed, but because something else entered. A presence that pulled focus inward, as though the world had become a single point. Lyrian reached outward with his mind, not as a call, but as a listening. At first there was silence. Then, not sound, but sensation. A mass of consciousness, not singular, not individual, a chorus. Countless wills layered atop one another, merging and separating in endless shifting patterns. Hunger, purpose, movement. a desire not rooted in greed or cruelty, but in the pure simplicity of existence, consume to continue to exist. The swarm did not think in words. It did not communicate in symbols. It felt. Lyrian opened himself further. Images flickered in his mind, like dreams born of galaxies. Great tendrils of living matter drifting across starfields. Planets reduced to skeletal remains. Civilizations devoured in silent, orderly processions. But also growth. New structures forming, new organisms, new symbioses. A cycle that did not consider morality. Serene watched Lyrian's expression shift. Calm, then strained, then still again. She gripped the railing, knuckles white. Arkan's gaze remained locked on Lyrian, jaw clenched, breath held. Then something changed. The swarm noticed him. A sensation like cold fire swept through the chamber. The shield casters flinched, one gasping aloud. Elira's staff glowed with blinding white light as she stabilized the anchor. A voice, not spoken, not heard, but recognized, formed itself within Lyrian's mind. You are aware. Lyrian steadied himself, drawing deep on the discipline forged across centuries. I am. His thought voice was steady, precise. I am Lyrian Vale, sovereign of Astraeon. I seek understanding. The swarm responded with something like curiosity, not emotional, but observational. Your world persists. Your kind endures. You move against the drift of decay. Why? Lyrian felt his breathing slow. Because life is more than consumption. Because meaning is more than survival. The swarm did not understand meaning. It understood pattern, cycle, balance. Meaning is hunger given shape. The response came not as argument, but as a simple expression of what was. Lyrian's heart sank, but he pressed on. There can be coexistence. There can be distance. You consume where you must. But there are worlds where your hunger may be sated without ending what we are. Let us find those paths together. The chamber trembled. Elira grit her teeth, bracing the network. One of the shield casters faltered and fell to her knees, but another moved to steady her. The swarm shifted, not resisting, but processing. Slowly, eternally. You fear ending. You fear the quiet after self. The words hit something deep in Lyrian's chest. He thought of the faces he had lost, the memories that had faded, the endless march of days. Yes, he answered, the truth bare. There was no judgment in the swarm's response, only statement. Then you fear what we are. A sudden surge of psychic energy pulsed through the chamber. The crystal ring flickered. The shield casters cried out. Elira's staff splintered with a sharp crack. Serene shouted, Lyrian. Arkan's hand moved toward the failsafe, but Lyrian did not collapse. He opened his eyes. They were calm. It does not reject us, he said softly. It seeks to understand what we are. The shield casters steadied. Elira lowered her broken staff, trembling. The chamber slowly stilled, and in that fragile stillness, a new realization settled like snow. Contact had been made, and the swarm was listening. The light in the sanctum dimmed slowly, the last echoes of psychic resonance fading into a hush that felt almost sacred. No one moved at first. Not Lyrian, still standing within the fading pillar of refracted light. Not Serene, whose hands still clutched the railing. Not Arkan, frozen over the failsafe. Even the shield casters remained locked in stillness, breathing ragged, eyes wide with awe and fear, as if any sudden movement might shatter the fragile equilibrium the ritual had created. When Lyrian finally stepped down from the platform, he moved with deliberate calm, not triumphant, not relieved, simply present, as though his consciousness had returned from a great distance and had not yet fully anchored itself in his body again. His gaze lifted to Serene first. She released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. There was no madness in his eyes, no hollowness, only quiet. Archon lowered his hand from the failsafe, though tension remained in his posture, wary and coiled. "What did it say?" he asked, voice low. Lyrian paused, searching for words that could carry the weight of what he had touched. "It did not speak," he said. "Not in thought as we understand it. It is a harmony of purpose, a convergence of need. To it, existence is hunger continued forward, an unbroken cycle." "That is not communication," Archon replied sharply. "That is instinct." "And yet it listens," Lyrian said. Those words unsettled the room. Serene descended from the dais to stand beside him. She saw the faint tremor in his hands, the cost of the communion still working through him. "You should rest." "There is no time," Lyrian said quietly. "If the swarm is truly evaluating us, it will seek evidence of our nature, whether we are worth preserving, altering, or consuming. We must show unity, purpose, continuity of identity." Serene nodded, though a subtle flicker of worry passed behind her eyes. The swarm had not agreed to coexistence. It had only paused, watching. A cosmic predator observing whether its prey had a reason to remain something other than sustenance. The council escorted the shieldcasters out of the chamber. Archony lingered, watching Lyrian with a gaze that no longer held open aggression, but something more complex. Assessment, perhaps, or search for fracture. "You took enormous risk," Archon said, his voice quieter now, more human. "If the swarm had decided to consume your consciousness, we would have lost everything." Lyrian met his eyes. "If the swarm had wanted to consume me, there would have been no struggle, no resistance. It does not fight, it absorbs. The fact that I still stand is our first sign of possibility." Arcan's jaw flexed, but he did not argue, not because he agreed, but because there were no words to counter a truth that existed beyond fear. He stepped aside, granting Lyrian passage. Lyrian and Serene left the sanctum through the east corridor, where tall crystal windows overlooked Aurelon. The city stretched outward in spirals and terraces, each level interconnected by bridges of pale stone, waterways glimmering below where morning light now slowly gathered strength. The air carried the scent of river lilies from the lower canals, and faint voices drifted upward, families speaking softly, soldiers preparing in orderly formations, scholars gathering in libraries to analyze every scrap of data from the ritual. Aurelon did not panic. It listened. For centuries, Lyrian had cultivated a culture that valued contemplation before reaction. Even now, as the sky whispered of threat, there was grace in how the city moved. Life continued, but quieter, more focused. Children walked beside their parents. Merchants arranged their stalls without calling out. The music that normally filled the plazas was absent, yet the silence was not empty. It was reverent. Serene watched the people from the balcony overlooking the grand amphitheater. "They're waiting for your word," she said. "They're waiting for meaning," Lyrian corrected gently. "What I say will become the story they tell themselves about what comes next. That is the true weight of leadership." She looked at him, not with awe or devotion, but with the understanding of one who had studied under him long enough to see the architecture behind his choices. "Then speak to them." He nodded once. They descended into the amphitheater where citizens had begun to gather, hundreds, then thousands. Soldiers in ceremonial armor stood in formation not as enforcers, but as reassurance. The platform at the center of the amphitheater rose slowly on gravitic lifts, bringing Lyrian and Serene into view. A hush fell. No herald announced him. No fanfare introduced him. He did not need such things. "My people," Lyrian began, voice steady and clear, carrying effortlessly across the open air. "We stand upon the edge of an era that will test the purpose of our existence. The swarm has entered our system. It has not attacked. It has not demanded surrender. It has listened." Soft murmurs rippled outward, not panicked, but deeply attentive. "We have been given a moment, brief, fragile, precious, to show what makes us more than matter to be consumed. Our unity, our compassion, our memory, our capacity to choose." Arkan watched from the balcony above, arms folded tightly across his chest, expression unreadable. Lyrian continued, "We do not know what the swarm will decide, but we will not meet it with fear. We will not scramble in desperation. We will not become a species defined solely by survival. We will meet what comes as who we are, with dignity and clarity." A stillness followed, deep and resonant. Then Serene stepped forward, not as heir, but as voice of the future. "We will not abandon our home," she said, her voice strong. "But we will not cling to it in blindness. We will seek understanding. We will stand together. We will protect each other. Whatever comes, we face it as one." The crowd did not erupt in cheers. It did something more powerful. It breathed as one. A collective exhale of fear released, replaced by a resolve that felt like iron settling into the bones of the city itself. Later, as the amphitheater emptied and citizens returned to their lives with quiet purpose, Lyrian and Serene walked along the high terraces. The sun had risen fully now, though its light was pale and strained. The river below shimmered softly. The city had regained movement, not frantic, but intentional. Yet beneath this moment of calm, Serene felt something shifting, subtle but unmistakable. Hope, fragile as spun glass, and under that, a shadow, because the swarm's silence was not reassurance. It was consideration. Arkan approached, his steps measured. "If unity is our shield," he said without preamble, "then we must prepare for the moment it fails." Serene turned toward him. "You still believe war is inevitable?" "I believe survival rarely wears noble colors," Arkan replied. "And we must be ready when the swarm decides what we are worth." Lyrian looked between them, the future he hoped for and the future he feared, both embodied in the two people standing before him. "Then we prepare," he said softly, "not to surrender, not to destroy, but to endure." The wind shifted, carrying the distant hum of planetary shields warming to life around the outer rim. Far beyond the atmosphere, a faint glimmer moved against the void. The swarm had not stopped. It had only paused its hunger long enough to watch and wait. The day unfolded beneath a sky washed pale. The light stretched thin, like paint diluted with too much water. It was neither bright nor dim, merely suspended, as though the world itself hesitated to commit to dawn or dusk. The city moved with quiet deliberation, each person aware on some instinctive level that history was no longer passing. It was forming. Lyrian walked through the central archives shortly after addressing the people, his steps measured, his expression composed. The archivist bowed as he passed, though their eyes lingered with questions they did not dare ask. He nodded in acknowledgement, offering a calm that he did not entirely feel. The communion with the swarm still echoed inside him, like the memory of a voice not spoken, but felt. He could sense the shape of its attention, broad, diffuse, patient, watching, waiting. Serene trailed behind him, silent yet present. She had spent the morning overseeing the coordination between defense rings and civilian evacuation channels, not as a surrender preparation, but as a precaution. She worked with precision, her commands clear and humane. She made difficult decisions seem bearable. She carried herself like someone who already led, even if she did not yet realize it. When they reached the planetary star map chamber, the lights dimmed automatically. A lattice of astrolithic projections shimmered into being, showing the local system. Astraeon at its center, ringed by moons and orbital platforms, surrounded by the glittering pathways of trade, research outposts, and outer listening stations. Beyond them, like a bruise spreading through the void, hung the swarm, a slow drift of living matter, planetary in scale, casting faint ripples in the gravitational fabric of space. It did not move like fleet or storm, it moved like tide. Serene studied the projection quietly. It's closer today. Yes, Lyrian said. Its pace has not changed. It does not accelerate in hunger, nor slow in contemplation. It simply continues. She frowned. Then how do we know it listened? How do we know it understood that we reached out with intention, not surrender? Lyrian did not answer at once. His gaze drifted through the map, but his thoughts were elsewhere, still touching that distant collective consciousness. Understanding is not something the swarm defines as we do, he said finally. It did not measure us in sentiment, nor logic. It measured us in pattern, coherence of identity. We are more organized than the civilizations it has consumed in the past. It did not expect unity without coercion. Serene's breath softened, thoughtful. So it is waiting to see if we fracture. Yes. His voice was quiet, heavy. If we break, if we splinter, if we devour ourselves with fear, it will know there is nothing here worth preserving. She looked at him with a seriousness that went beyond duty. Then we must not fracture. Lyrian knew the truth waiting unspoken behind her words. But fractures had already begun. Arkan's soul had not attended the public address. His absence had not gone unnoticed, and whispers had already begun to stir across the city's political tiers. He stood now in the lower citadel barracks, speaking to officers not in uniform formation, but in quiet, private groups. A gathering of those who valued strength over philosophy, certainty over contemplation. The military elite of Astraeon was loyal, yes, but loyalty had layers. Lyrian had long earned their respect, but respect was not the same as agreement. Arkan, on the Chint, other hand, embodied action, decisive, forceful, direct. He spoke to their instincts, their training, their clarity of purpose, and he did not have to openly challenge Lyrian to do so. Hope is not a strategy, Arkan said to the officers gathered in the subterranean hall. His voice carried the controlled strength of someone who believed utterly in what he spoke. We prepare defenses now, not after we are judged weak. If the swarm sees our readiness, perhaps we will earn respect, not pity. Some nodded immediately, others hesitated. One commander asked, "But the sovereign has not forbidden military readiness." Arkan allowed a faint smile, measured, patient. No, but he also has not ordered it, and in the space where leadership hesitates, crisis grows. His words were like water poured slowly into cracks, seeping, spreading, shaping the stone around them. Meanwhile, Lyrian and Serene continued their ascent to the observatory terraces. The wind shifted, carrying the faint drone of shuttle engines moving in organized patterns above the city. Not evacuation, positioning. Defensive readiness was being prepared regardless of spoken orders. Serene noticed. The fleet captains are mobilizing. Yes, Lyrian replied. No surprise, no approval, no reprimand. You're allowing them to act, she said slowly. It is necessary to give the appearance of strength, Lyrian answered, though his gaze remained distant. But there is a line. If we build walls too high, the swarm will interpret it as resistance, not identity. And if we build nothing at all, it will interpret us as weak. Our survival rests in the balance between preparation and peace. Serene exhaled, a balance that leaves no room for error. There has never been room for error, he said softly. For a moment they stood in silence, watching the thin morning light catch the faint haze of mist rising from the river channels below. The city felt suspended, the way a bird hovers between wing beats, neither falling nor rising. Then Serene spoke again. You are hiding something from me. Lyrian did not look away from the horizon. You intend to accept the swarm's offer, she said. Not accusation. Truth, uncovered. He closed his eyes. He had hoped she would not see it yet, but of course she had. She always did. The swarm does not offer coexistence, he said. It offers assimilation, but assimilation can occur slowly, gradually, in stages. If we become part of the swarm's network by intention rather than force, Astraeon might retain its memory, its essence, its culture. We may not survive unchanged, but we may survive. Her voice was quiet, but shaken, at the cost of our humanity. At the cost of being consumed entirely, he replied. There are only two paths before us. I am trying to shape a third. Serene stepped back, the distance subtle but unmistakable. Her chest felt tight, as though something inside her had been pulled, open without warning. You have already made your decision, she whispered. I have made a beginning, he said, not an end. But she did not answer. Elsewhere, in the lower barracks, Arkan spoke a quiet vow to the officers who now stood behind him, not in rebellion, but in readiness. If the sovereign chooses surrender, he said, we will choose Astraeon. The officers bowed their heads. The fracture widened. Back on the terrace, Serene walked away, not in anger, but in grief too deep for words. Lyrian did not follow. He could not. The sky above them was clear, but the swarm continued its slow, inevitable movement through the void, and Astraeon hung between salvation and ruin, caught in the thin space where hope and fear were the same shape, seen from opposite sides. The quiet that settled over Astraeon in the days following the communion was not peace. It was the silence of minds turning inward, of belief shifting, of loyalties reconsidered. The city continued to move, its markets opened, its scholars studied, its soldiers drilled. But the rhythm had changed. Every conversation felt cautious, every gesture weighed, every glance searching for meaning beneath the surface. Even the wind seemed to whisper questions. Serene had not spoken to Lyrian since their exchange on the terrace. She had not avoided him. She still performed her duties, coordinated the defense networks, reviewed supply logistics, mediated council disputes. But there was a new distance in her presence, a quiet, aching tension. Lyrian felt it like gravity, subtle yet constant. Every time he saw her pass through the corridors, he saw how her stride remained steady, but her gaze no longer lingered on him when they crossed. He did not call her to him. He knew that forcing clarity too soon would not heal what now lay between them. Some wounds needed time to reveal their shape before they could be tended to, and this one was still forming. Arkan Saul, meanwhile, did not wait. He did not stir rebellion. He did not call for revolution. He did not speak against the sovereign in public. His strategy was quieter, precise, almost elegant in its restraint. He began attending training drills in full armor, his presence radiating authority and conviction. He walked the barracks, speaking with soldiers not as commander, but as equal, sharing quiet words of resolve. He visited the academies, addressing students who had once studied diplomacy and commerce, urging them to consider the responsibility of heritage and survival. He met with ship captains to review orbital defense patterns, his tone always calm, always rational. He did not promise war. He simply reminded them that war might come. His influence spread like steady fire, not consuming all at once, but warming the stone beneath until it softened. Soldiers began to look to him first when decisions were discussed. Counselors began to seek his thoughts before voicing their own. Even some of the shieldcasters had begun to regard him as the anchor of certainty in a time when certainty had become rare. Serene noticed this change, not with alarm, but with growing understanding. Arkan's rise wasn't born of ambition, but of necessity. The people needed someone who embodied decisiveness. And Lyrian, for all his wisdom, had stepped into a realm of uncertainty where no clear path existed. But unity required belief, and belief was beginning to divide. The first outward sign of fracture came not from the military nor the council, but from the temple of eternal memory. The priesthood, long symbols of Astraeon's cultural identity and guardians of its ancestral traditions, made a public declaration, a statement carved in luminous script along the facade of the temple for every citizen to read. Identity must not be surrendered to survival. If the cost of endurance is erasure, then we choose to end, not dissolve. The words glowed through the night like a beacon or a warning. Crowds gathered outside the temple steps, some in silence, some speaking in heated whispers. Families who had prayed there for generations watched with grief as the temple bells rang, not in reverence, but in lamentation. Serene stood among them, hood drawn over her head, unseen. She listened as two young scholars argued softly nearby. "If the swarm consumes us, we die," one said. "We vanish entirely. Our memory, our cultures, lost." The other replied, voice breaking, "But if we become part of it, with our identity intact, we don't die, we change. Isn't that worth something?" Serene felt the tremor of her own doubt reflected in their words. She returned to the palace that evening with her thoughts unsteady. The halls were quiet, lit only by the soft glow of bioluminescent lanterns that pulsed gently like beating hearts. As she walked the corridor overlooking the south gardens, she found Lyrian standing there, facing the horizon. The sky was deep violet now, the stars faint against the dying light. He did not turn when she approached, though he had known she was there from the moment her footsteps echoed along the marble. "You saw the temple's declaration," he said. "Yes." Her voice was steady, though her chest felt tight. "The city is dividing." He nodded once. Division was inevitable. When purpose is challenged, certainty becomes precious, and fear becomes persuasive. She moved closer, but not beside him. Near enough to speak, but with a measure of distance still between them. "You once told me that leadership is not about never being challenged. It is about bearing the weight of being doubted without losing yourself." He closed his eyes for a moment. "I remember." She hesitated. "Are you losing yourself, Lyrian?" He turned then, slowly, meeting her gaze. His expression was calm, but there was depth in it, pain, reflection, resolve. "I am trying not to," he said, "but there are truths I cannot ignore. The swarm does not destroy meaning out of malice. It simply does not recognize it. If we cannot teach it to see meaning differently, then all we are will vanish. And if we fight it without understanding, we will be consumed by our own desperation before it ever reaches the surface of our world. Serene's voice softened. And if we teach it to see meaning differently, what happens to us? Lyrian lowered his gaze. We change. The word hung between them, heavy with all it implied and all it threatened. Her fingers tightened at her sides. Change into what? He answered with a truth that had no comfort. Into something that remembers who we were but is no longer us. She felt the ache bloom behind her sternum again. Not betrayal, something deeper, the grief of possibility. Before she could respond, the faint hum of approaching footsteps echoed behind them. Arkan emerged onto the terrace, stopping a short distance away. His posture was formal, but his tone was controlled. The outer listening posts have reported new movement, he said. The swarm's formation has shifted. It is spreading into a wider pattern. It may be preparing to surround the system. Lyrian absorbed the information with a quiet inhale. Then the time left to choose grows short. Serene looked between them. Two pillars of Astraeon. Two visions for its survival. Two futures. One bound to the memory of what they were. One bound to the possibility of what they might become. Arkan stepped closer, eyes steady. The people are beginning to look to you and to me. They will choose one of us, Lyrian, whether we ask them to or not. The breeze stirred, carrying the scent of night blossoms. The city below glowed with 1,000 lanterns, each one a fragile point of light. Lyrian spoke softly, not in command, but in acceptance. Then the war that comes next will not begin in the stars. No, Arkan said. It will begin in the hearts of our own. Serene closed her eyes. The war of voices had begun, and the swarm, across the void, continued to watch. The swarm did not announce its arrival with thunder or flame. There were no roaring engines, no invasion fleets, no declarations of war. It came quietly, as it always had, its presence spreading across the void like ink blooming through water. The first sign, visible to the naked eye, was a change in the morning sky. The blue deepened too quickly. The horizon darkened at the edges, as though night had begun to seep in through cracks. High-altitude watchers were the first to see the shapes. Silhouettes descending from the upper atmosphere, drifting like enormous seeds carried on silent wind. These were not ships. They were organisms, biological colossi, grown in the cold dark between stars, formed of layered chitin and membrane. They did not burn as they entered the atmosphere. Their bodies exuded a vapor that cooled the air around them, a thin mist that spread in sheets of soft, luminescent haze. They fell slowly, as, if guided not by gravity, but by intention. The people of Orelon stepped into the streets to watch. No panic, no screams, just awe, sharp and fragile. The city bells, normally struck only for holy observances or state ceremonies, tolled once, long and low, signalling an event beyond the known. Serene stood on the upper balcony of one of the palace towers, watching the first of the swarm biostructures descend. Her heart beat hard against her ribs, a deep, steady thud. There was something terrible and beautiful in the sight. The organism unfurled as it lowered, petals of iridescent tissue spreading open like a flower in slow motion bloom. Within its center, bioluminescent veins pulsed with light, like a heart visible through translucent flesh. Below her, the square was filled with citizens. Some knelt in reverence, some clung to one another, some simply stared. "We are being observed," Serene murmured, half to herself. Lyrian stood beside her, silent, His face bore no fear, only a heavy stillness. The swarm was not attacking, not yet. It was simply arriving, testing the boundaries of their response. "It is the equivalent of a diplomat," he said softly, "a biological envoy, not meant to communicate in words, but in presence. It wants us to see it." "And to see how we react," Serene replied. "Yes." Below, the organism touched the plaza floor with a sound like soft bones settling. The mist around it thickened, luminous, casting the surrounding marble in a gentle blue sheen. The plaza guards took a single step back, no more. Trained discipline held. Arkan arrived a moment later, armor still dusted from drill, his presence sharp as a blade beside the softness of the descending creature. He did not look at Lyrian, but his voice was steady. "This is the moment that defines us," he said. "If we falter, the swarm will read it as weakness. If we move too aggressively, it will respond with overwhelming force." Serene turned to him. "Then what do you propose?" Arkan's eyes remained fixed on the creature. "We show strength, but not hostility. Formation lines only, no weapons drawn." Lyrian nodded. Arkan gave the signal, and guards across the plaza moved into position, not forming a wall, but a boundary, a statement. "We see you. We are not defenseless, but we will not strike first." The creature responded. Its surface rippled, as though something beneath its membrane shifted. A slit opened slowly along its center, revealing layers of shimmering tissue and nodes that pulsed with soft light. It was not threatening, yet the sight stirred something primal in every observer. A memory buried deep in the evolutionary marrow of every living being. Recognition of something older. Something that fed on stars long before worlds bore names. The city held its breath. Then a sound emerged, not vocal, not mechanical, but resonant, like a chord played on invisible strings. It vibrated through the plaza, through the stone, through the bodies of those who stood there. Lyrian felt the echo of it in his bones, deep and slow. He understood. The creature was not communicating. It was listening. "We must respond," Serene whispered. Lyrian closed his eyes. His mind reached outward, not in full communion this time, but in acknowledgement. "We are here." The creature's resonance shifted slightly, an adjustment, a focusing. Arkan stepped forward, but Serene stopped him with a gentle hand to his arm. "Wait," she murmured. "Let it choose what comes next." Arkan looked at her, not with disdain, but with something like recognition. She could feel the weight he carried too, the burden of leadership that did not yet belong to him, but which more and more people looked to him to hold. The creature extended one of its appendages, not a limb, but a gentle, ribbon-like tendril that brushed the air as if testing the temperature of trust. It drifted toward a child standing near the fountain, a girl no older than 10, her eyes wide and unblinking. The plaza guards shifted in alarm, but Lyrian raised his hand, halting them. The tendril did not touch the child. It hovered near her, pulsing in soft rhythm. A light spread across the space between them, a subtle glow like shared breath. The girl blinked slowly, then smiled, a small, fearless expression, pure as morning sunlight. It was not feeding. It was learning. The crowd exhaled all at once, but the moment did not remain untouched. A soldier in the back ranks stepped forward, breath unsteady, hand trembling at the grip of his weapon. Fear overwhelmed training. Instinct drowned reason. He raised his rifle, not to fire, but to aim. It was enough. The creature recoiled, not in fear, in reconfiguration. Its membrane folded inward, reshaping, restructuring, spiraling. The air pressure shifted. A deep, low frequency vibrated outward. People staggered. The guards raised shields. The plaza rippled with shock. Lyrian stepped forward immediately, voice firm, clear, unwavering. "Stand down." But the creature had already changed. Its body unfurled into new shapes. Ribbed armor plates, elongated sensory limbs, layers of bone-like carapace emerging like a blossom reversing its bloom. The mist thickened into something denser, like spores igniting on the air. The girl screamed, not in pain, but in shock, as the tendril withdrew sharply. Arkan drew his blade. Serene reached for his arm again, but this time he did not allow the touch to hold him. The city was seconds away from violence. Lyrian moved first, not toward the creature, toward the soldier. He placed a hand on the soldier's rifle and lowered it calmly, firmly. The young man's breath shook. His fear spilled over in silent tears. Lyrian met his eyes, and something in the soldier steadied. Shame, perhaps, or understanding. The creature stilled. Slowly, deliberately, Lyrian stepped toward it. Serene's breath caught. Arkan tensed. But the creature did not lash out. It lowered, itself, withdrawing its armored adaptations, its form softening again, though not fully returning to its original shape. It was cautious now, watching. Lyrian placed his hand against its membrane. The resonance returned, not violent, not invasive, simply present. We saw fear. "Yes," Lyrian answered silently. "We learn fear, and what you do next will decide if we learn trust." The creature remained still, considering. Then it folded its luminous petals inward, compacting into a shape like a seed once more, and ascended slowly back into the sky, leaving the plaza bathed in cold blue light and silence. No cheers rose, no cries of victory, only quiet understanding. The swarm had seen Astraeon's first fracture, and it would remember. The great plaza remained silent long after the swarm's envoy ascended into the sky. The luminous mist lingered, clinging to the marble stones and the statues that lined the square, faintly glowing like the residue of a dream not yet fully awakened. No one moved at first. The citizens stood as though the air itself had thickened around them, a delicate membrane that, if disturbed, might shatter and release something irreversible. The girl, who had come so close to touching the creature, clung to her mother's hand, her small face calm in a way that made adults uneasy. She had not seen threat. She had seen wonder. Lyrian watched the crowd disperse in small, uncertain waves. No one spoke loudly. They whispered, as if the city itself had become a cathedral, and every voice risked breaking a sacred silence. Serene walked at his side, but she did not look at him. Her gaze was distant, fixed on the shadows stretching across the plaza as the sun dipped lower. Arkan walked slightly behind them, his posture rigid, jaw locked, as though each step required effort not to turn back and rally the soldiers in some decisive direction. When they returned to the palace, the council was waiting. They had not convened by summons. They had gathered because their world had shifted again, and they could feel it. The council chamber was dimly lit, the crystal white ring of the central table casting a pale glow on the tense faces around it. The representatives took their seats in silence, though Arkan remained standing, hands clasped behind his back, a living embodiment of the blade unsheathed, but not yet swung. Lyrian did not take his usual place at the central dais. Instead, he remained standing as well, not in defiance, but in acknowledgement of the gravity of this moment. Serene stood beside him, her expression composed but unreadable. "Let us speak of what occurred," Lyrian began, his voice calm, measured. The envoy did not attack. It reacted to fear, Our response will define how the swarm understands us moving forward. A counselor at the far side of the table, a man whose family had once commanded entire fleets before peace rendered such influence symbolic, leaned forward, his voice strained. We cannot allow such creatures to land in our city again. The people cannot endure this kind of tension. They do not know whether to bow or flee. Another counselor, a woman with silver-braided hair and an expression carved from discipline, spoke more carefully. The girl who approached it was unharmed. The creature responded with intent to learn, not consume. There is meaning here. Arkan stepped forward. There is also danger. We stand on the edge of annihilation. We cannot allow diplomacy to blind us to survival. We should deploy our orbital fleet now. Let the swarm see that we are not prey. And provoke retaliation, Serene asked quietly. The swarm does not strike in anger. It consumes when it sees no identity worth preserving. If we respond with violence now, we may seal our fate. Arkan turned to her, not harshly, but with a gravity that struck deeper. You saw the fear in the soldier's eyes. That fear lives in thousands now. Fear spreads faster than reason. Serene's expression flickered. So we answer fear with discipline, not aggression. Arkan said nothing for several heartbeats. Then, discipline requires belief, and belief is no longer united. The room went still. The fracture, once subtle, now stood in the open. Lyrian stepped toward the council table. The swarm is watching how we treat each other. Our unity is our message. If we fracture, we already have, Arkan said. It was not accusation, it was truth. Lyrian held his gaze. Arkan, if you have something to say, speak it. Arkan drew a slow breath, not to steady himself, but to gather the weight of his words. There are those among us who believe you no longer stand for Astraean survival, that your decision to negotiate with the swarm is surrender dressed as strategy. They believe you intend to give us to it piece by piece. Serene's breath stopped in her chest. The council chamber felt suddenly too small. Lyrian did not react with anger. His voice remained quiet. And what do you believe? Arkan's eyes for the first time in many years showed pain. Real pain. I believe you are tired. I believe your grief has shaped your vision into something that mistakes endurance for identity. I believe you would rather see Astraeon become part of the swarm than watch it fall. And I cannot follow you into that. The words landed with the force of a blade driven into stone. Serene spoke, her voice trembling not with weakness, but with the strain of holding two truths at once. Arkan, Lyrian seeks to preserve us, not surrender us. Arkan turned to her, and the sorrow in his expression was almost unbearable. And you do not see what you are already losing by following him. The child in the plaza did not fear the swarm because she does not yet understand what we are. But we do. Our history is built on choice, on meaning, on identity shaped over centuries of grief and triumph. If we accept assimilation, even a slow one, we erase the very core of what we are. We become memory without self. Serene's throat tightened. The alternative is extinction. The silence that followed was sharper than any shout. Arkan faced Lyrian once more. You once taught me that leadership is not merely about protecting life. It is about protecting meaning. I have not forgotten that lesson. Lyrian felt something shift inside him, small, quiet, devastating. I taught you to lead with heart, he said, not with fear. Arkan's voice was gentle, almost unbearably so. I lead with love for this world, which is why, if you choose the path of surrender, I will oppose you, and others will stand with me. There it was, the fracture, no longer subtle, no longer unseen. Serene looked between them, Lyrian, the immortal who had carried the world's memory alone for centuries. Arkan, the strategist who had become the embodiment of steadfast defiance. Two pillars, two futures, and she caught between them, not as mediator, but as the decision that would define everything. The council chamber did not erupt into argument. It fell into silence, a silence dense with inevitability. Lyrian closed his eyes for a moment, as though feeling the full weight of eternity settle in his bones. Then he spoke. Arkan, if you intend to challenge me for leadership, do not do so in secret. Speak it clearly. Arkan did not hesitate. I will. Serene felt her heartbeat rupture into something hot and painful. The councillors did not gasp. They simply breathed, slow, stunned, resigned. The paths had diverged. Across the night sky, above the palace towers, the glow of the bioluminescent mist still shimmered faintly. The swarm watched, and the first true fissure in Astraeon opened, no longer a tension of ideas, but a fracture of allegiance. The storm that would follow had already begun to gather. Night descended over Aurelon like a slow closing hand. The city's white marble softened into shades of grey, and lantern light flickered along the canals, mirrored in ripples that trembled with the passing wind. Yet the quiet was not peace. It was the stillness of a city holding its breath, waiting for something it could not name but already feared. The swarm's envoy had returned to the upper atmosphere, drifting like a second moon veiled in mist. It did not descend again. It did not retreat. It hovered, watching. Its presence pressed against the nerves of the world. Not a threat, not a promise. A question. In the council chamber, no decisions were made. Words had become weapons and silence had become distance. The councillors dispersed in tight knots of conversation, their voices hushed, their expressions strained. Some stayed behind to speak to Arkan in low, urgent tones. Others drifted toward Serene, uncertain, searching for stability in her calm. But she gave them little. She did not yet know where her own centre lay. Lyrian withdrew from the chamber without remark. He did not appear defeated or alarmed. He moved like someone who had already walked the path that now began to open before him. He made his way to the tower of the old observatory. He had always come here in times of change. He stood there now, overlooking the quiet city, the mist of the swarm glowing faintly in the sky. His hands rested against the stone balustrade, fingers steady. His heart felt heavy, not with regret and not with certainty. Something quieter, something like the memory of a song fading at its final note. He heard the footsteps before Serene reached him. He did not turn. She joined him in silence, her presence familiar, grounding, though her thoughts were anything but still. You knew this was coming, she said at last. Yes, Lyrian replied. Not its shape, but its inevitability. She looked out at the city below, the lanterns scattered like constellations fallen into streets and rivers. Arkan will challenge your leadership, and many will stand with him. Yes. She watched him closely. You do not seem afraid. He closed his eyes for a moment. I am not afraid of losing power. Leadership was never ownership to me. I held this world in my hands, not as a possession, but as a responsibility. If Arkan truly believed he could protect Astraeon better than I can, I would step aside willingly. His voice softened. But he does not seek protection. He seeks preservation. And preservation without understanding becomes destruction. Serene felt it, the sharp truth of it, the wound and the warning intertwined. He believes you would dissolve what we are, she said. And I believe he would shatter us in trying to save us, Lyrian replied. She nodded slowly. Two futures, both born of love. Yes. He looked at her then, finally meeting her eyes. And love, when divided, becomes a blade. The wind shifted, carrying the distant sound of temple bells. Not from the temple of eternal memory this time, but from the shoreline monastery, a small place that only rang its bells in times of mourning or revelation. The sound was soft, hollow, ancient. Serene's breath caught. Something's happened. A messenger arrived moments later, running through the lift corridors, breathless. His voice trembled when he spoke. My sovereign, the outer cities of the Western Valley, Valrena, Solithar, and the river settlements beyond, they are gone. The world stilled. Gone? Serene asked. Destroyed? No. The messenger swallowed, voice cracking. Silent. He meant exactly that. Silent. Not burning, not shattered, not invaded. Simply absent, as though they had been swallowed whole. Lyrian did not hesitate. He turned and began walking toward the command spire. Serene followed, her heartbeat roaring in her ears. The path into the spire felt longer than usual. Every corridor seemed to stretch. Every moment weighed. Officers gathered before they even reached the observatory floor, their faces pale, their voices clipped. A projection was already active. The image was stark. 3 regions across the Western Valley, once lush with terraced gardens and reflective canals, stood as still voids. No movement, no sound, no energy signatures, no life. Not obliterated, consumed. Like a memory erased without violence. Arkan was already there, jaw set, eyes locked on the projection. Lyrian stepped beside him, their shoulders aligned, 2 halves of a fracture not yet broken open. The swarm has begun its assessment, Lyrian said quietly. Arkan's voice was low, controlled through effort. Then it has seen us as weak. Not weak, Lyrian replied. Uncertain. Serene felt the words like stones in her chest. It is testing us, she whispered. Yes, Lyrian said. It has consumed only where identity is thin, where meaning is diffuse, where unity has frayed the most. Arkan turned sharply. Then it has already begun to devour us. There was no comfort in denying it. The truth stood bare before them. The valley settlements believed nothing would reach them. Arkan continued. They argued over resources and borders. They refused to participate in the unity accords. They were the first to fracture, and the swarm saw it. Serene closed her eyes. The swarm was not punishing. It was measuring. This is only the beginning, Arkan said. If we remain divided, the swarm will consume us city by city, not in fury, but in efficiency. A silence followed, deep and heavy. Lyrian spoke first. We must address the people. They must understand that unity is not symbolic. It is survival itself. But Arkan did not respond with agreement. He stepped forward, his voice ringing with a clarity that carried through the command chamber. No, we must show strength. We deploy the orbital fleet. We strike the swarm's nearest node structures. We remind it that we are not passive organisms waiting to be absorbed. Serene's heart tightened. That will provoke it. It has already begun consuming our world, Arkan said. This is not negotiation. This is devouring. Lyrian's voice remained calm. A strike now will confirm to the swarm that we are incapable of coexistence. Arkan's eyes burned, and doing nothing will confirm that we are incapable of defending ourselves. The chamber held its breath. 2 truths, 2 futures, and the swarm did not wait. A soft tone sounded from the observatory sensors. New movement detected above the capital. The envoy was descending again, but this time not alone. 8 more forms drifted behind it, like a constellation of living vessels. Their light pulsed in synchronized rhythm. like the beat of a vast heart. The swarm had decided something. Serene felt her pulse pound hard enough to shake her bones. It is responding to what it has seen. Yes, Lyrian whispered. It has seen division. Arkan stepped forward, voice steady, unbreaking. Then this is where we choose who we are. And Serene, standing between them, felt the truth of the moment settle in her chest like a blade being sheathed into its place. Not yet drawn, but inevitable. The sky darkened as the 9 swarm organisms descended together, their forms drifting through the atmosphere like slow-moving planets made of living light. The mist they exuded shimmered in soft pulses, casting the city below in a glow that felt neither warm nor cold. An illumination without emotion, without intention. It did not feel like an arrival. It felt like a verdict. Citizens gathered in balconies and courtyards once more, but now their faces were drawn tight, their breaths shallow. No child stepped forward in awe this time. No one reached out. The wonder had changed into something quieter, heavier, a grief that had not yet taken shape, but already felt inevitable. In the command spire, the 3 stood together again. Lyrian, Serene, and Arkan. But not as they once had. There was a space now between them, invisible yet widening with each passing breath. And outside, the swarm glowed softly like stars reflected in water. It is waiting, Lyrian murmured. It has seen our fracture. It is deciding. Arkan stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his sheathed blade, though he did not draw it. His voice carried no anger this time, only certainty. Then we must show it unity, no matter the cost. Serene looked at him sharply. Unity through force is not unity. It is fear wearing armor. And unity that dissolves identity is nothing but surrender, Arkan replied. Listen to me, Serene. You know him. You know what he intends. He will give us to the swarm piece by piece because it is the only way he sees to avoid extinction. But existence without self is not survival. Serene felt her breath shake, not outwardly, but inward, deep behind her ribs. She had known these words were coming long before Arkan spoke them aloud, and still they cut. Lyrian did not interrupt. He simply watched her, his expression calm, though there was something beneath it that made her chest tighten. Not fear, not arrogance. Something more human. Something like sorrow. Arkan turned to him. There are soldiers preparing to follow my orders. Not because I commanded them, because they believe. He let the words hang. They believe you have already chosen assimilation over us. Serene felt the silence that followed like pressure building behind her sternum. Lyrian spoke softly, his voice steady. I have chosen to seek understanding, not surrender. If there is a path where Astraeon survives with memory intact, with identity preserved, I must take it, even if that path frightens those who have not yet seen what I have. Arkan shook his head slowly. You speak of vision, but what you truly carry is exhaustion. You have lived too long, Lyrian. Too many cycles, too many endings. You have grown weary of fighting for identity, and now you think surrender is wisdom. Serene saw the flicker that crossed Lyrian's eyes, brief, deep, true. He did not deny it, and Arkan saw it too. This is why I cannot follow you, Arkan said. The swarm pulsed outside, as though listening to the silence between them more intently than any words. Lyrian stepped toward Serene, not Arkan. You asked what we become if we survive this, he said quietly. The answer is this. We become something that remembers, and memory can be a form of living. Serene's voice was low. Memory without self is echo, not life. Their eyes held. Lyrian's heart felt unbearably heavy. He had guided her through childhood, through grief, through the harsh lessons of leadership. He had taught her how to hold the world with open hands, not claws. And now he saw the shape of the future forming in her gaze, the future where she no longer followed him. Arkan approached her slowly, his voice gentler than it had ever been. Serene, if you stand with me, they will follow you. Not because you demand it, because you understand them. You feel what they fear and what they love. You can lead them to preserve us, not as something new, but as ourselves. She did not move. She did not speak. Lyrian watched her, saw every thought passing like shadows behind her eyes. He knew her better than anyone. He knew her heart, her strength, her grief. He saw her choosing, but he did not speak to stop her. He only said, "Whatever you choose, I will not see you as enemy." The words were truth, and they broke something inside her. Serene stepped back, not toward Arkan, not toward Lyrian, but into a space between them. Her voice was quiet, but it carried through the chamber like wind through empty halls. "If I choose him," she said, "I lose you." Lyrian's expression did not falter. "You lose only what time had already taken." Arkan closed his eyes, exhaling slowly, as though he too had been holding something tightly wound within himself. The swarm pulsed again in the sky. A low tremor rolled through the city, not destructive, not violent. An answer. Serene felt her decision settle into place, not as a declaration, but as the only path left. She turned to Arkan first. "If we strike now, we doom everyone. The swarm will respond, not in anger, but in inevitability. We cannot defeat it in open war. You know that." Arkan's jaw tightened, but he listened. She turned to Lyrian. "And if we assimilate, even slowly, we lose what binds us to each other. What makes this world home? We become a memory of ourselves." Lyrian did not look away. Serene stepped between them fully now, no longer uncertain. "Then the path must be neither surrender nor defiance." Arkan frowned. "There is no third path." "There is," Serene said, "but it is not one either of you can walk alone." And then she did something neither expected. She reached for Lyrian's hand, not to comfort him, but to take something from him. The psychic resonance from the communion still lingered in him, an echo of the swarm's consciousness, a thread between minds. Serene drew from it, not power, but awareness, a fragment of what Lyrian had seen and felt. The connection sparked between them, bright and sharp, a bridge formed not from understanding, but from necessity. Lyrian's breath caught, not from pain, but from realization. She could do what he could not. She could walk between. She released his hand. A faint glow lingered in her eyes, subtle but unmistakable. Arkan stared at her, not with shock, but with awe. "You," he began, but stopped, his voice breaking under the weight of what he saw. Serene turned to the window, where the swarm hovered, waiting. "I will speak to it," she said. Lyrian's voice was soft. "You could be consumed." "Yes," she said, "but I will not go as supplicant. I will go as heir." Arkan stepped forward. "I will not let you risk that alone." She looked at him, and the bond between them, subtle, unspoken, years in the making, shone through her gaze. "You cannot follow me where I must go," she said gently, "but you can hold this world while I do." Arkan bowed his head, not in submission, but in trust. Lyrian watched her, pride and grief interwoven so tightly they were indistinguishable. "You were always meant to surpass me," he murmured. Serene stepped forward toward the balcony. The swarm pulsed once more, awaiting her. She did not hesitate. She moved toward the light, and the city held its breath, not in fear this time, but in the fragile shape of hope sharp enough to cut. The balcony doors opened onto a wind that carried the faint scent of ionized air, the trace of something vast pressing against the atmosphere. Serene stepped forward without hesitation. Her cloak trailed behind her like a dark river spilling forward into light. Below, the city's terraces and plazas glowed faintly beneath the strange luminescence of the swarm suspended overhead. People had gathered in the open spaces, not in panic, but in stillness, watching, waiting. The sky above Orelon was no longer a canvas of familiar twilight. It had become a veil of shifting colour, deep blues and pale violets blending with the luminescent haze of the organisms hovering just beyond the clouds. They hung there like patient stars, not descending, not retreating, listening. Serene stepped to the edge of the balcony. Lyrian and Arkan stood behind her, two figures shaped by the same world, forged in the same fires, now bearing opposite shadows. Their presence followed her, though neither reached for her. The distance had changed. Not an exile, but a respectful silence. Serene breathed in deeply, her lungs filling with air that trembled faintly, as though it carried music too low to hear. When she exhaled, the world below seemed to lean closer. She closed her eyes and let the fragment she had taken from Lyrian settle deeper into her consciousness. It was not power. It was awareness, an echo of the swarm's voice, not as command or hunger, but as presence. It was like standing at the edge of a horizon where countless lives converged into one continuous tide. For a moment, Serene felt herself dissolving, her identity thinning into something formless. She pressed her hands against the stone railing to anchor herself. "I am here," she whispered, not aloud, but inwardly, across the vast thread of awareness that stretched between her and the swarm. Something opened. It was not a doorway. It was not light. It was recognition. She felt a shift. The nearest of the living vessels descended, its form rippling in slow motion, the bioluminescent veins along its surface pulsing at a rate that matched her heartbeat. The mist surrounding it thickened, not obscuring vision, but softening the world like a dream painted in slow strokes. The organism hovered just beyond the balcony, close enough to touch, if one dared. Arkan tensed, hand hovering near his weapon. Lyrian placed a hand lightly on his arm, not to command, but to guide. "Do not move," Lyrian murmured. The envoy pulsed once more. Serene reached outward, not with her hand but with the mind. The world fell away. There was no sky, no city, no wind, no body, no self, only presence. The swarm's awareness was not a singular mind. It was a cascade, layers upon layers of pattern. Not thought, but function. Not identity, but continuity. She felt herself submerged in it, not drowning, but suspended. It was like being held by a tide that had no beginning. Your shape is changing. The sensation was not words, but it communicated meaning. Serene steadied herself within the vastness. "I am not changing. I am choosing." The swarm responded with what could only be described as curiosity. Choose. Show. Serene felt something beneath the surface of its awareness, something buried under eons of instinct and purpose. A memory of coexistence before consumption became necessity, before hunger became identity. A time when the swarm was not predator, but participant. She saw glimpses, planets of coral and crystal where life moved in harmony with the swarm, exchanging memory instead of matter. But that was before something had shifted in the cosmos, before scarcity, before collapse, before hunger. Serene reached toward that memory, not to claim it, but to understand. We remember what we lose. It was not regret, it was fact. The swarm consumed to survive because it had once lost something it could not regain. Serene's eyes opened. She stood once more on the balcony, the wind cool against her face. She had been gone only a heartbeat, and yet she felt the world differently. The envoy hovered before her, still waiting, still listening. Arkan took a single step forward, not aggressive, but drawn. "What did you see?" Serene turned to him, her voice quiet but steady. "The swarm does not hunger for destruction. It hungers because hunger is all that remains of what it once was. It does not destroy identity to erase it. It consumes to survive." Arkan exhaled slowly, his expression shifting from anger to something heavier, understanding laced with grief. "And you believe we can restore what it lost?" Serene's gaze did not waver. "I believe we can remind it of what it was, but only if we keep our identity intact, only if we remain who we are." Her eyes moved to Lyrian. He listened without interruption, his silence an offering rather than judgment. "I do not reject what you sought," she said to him, "but I see where your path leads. If we integrate too quickly, if we surrender ourselves in the name of survival, we become only memory, not self. We vanish into the tide. But if we resist only in fear, we ignite a war we cannot win." She placed her hand over her chest, where her heartbeat steadied. "We must stand at the threshold, not surrender, not defy. We must teach." Arkan stepped closer, his expression haunted. "Teach the swarm identity? Purpose? Meaning?" "Yes." Serene lifted her chin. "Because meaning is what we are, and if we lose it, whether to assimilation or to war, Astrion dies." Lyrian's eyes softened, not with relief, but with a deep and sorrowful pride. "You have found the path I could not," he said quietly. She shook her head. "No, you showed me where to look." Arkan's voice carried the weight of a man realizing that leadership was not victory, but sacrifice. "What must we do?" Serene turned once more to the envoy, the glow of its bioluminescent surface reflecting in her eyes. "We must offer the swarm something it has not seen in millennia." She extended her hand, not in surrender, but in invitation. "To share memory without consumption." The envoy pulsed. The city held its breath. Arkan watched her with awe. Lyrian watched her with love that had no need to bind. And Astraeon waited at the edge of becoming. The envoy responded not with movement, but with resonance, a pulse of light that rippled through its translucent membrane and radiated outward in concentric waves. The air trembled. The stone beneath Serene's feet seemed to hum with a faint vibration, as though the city itself had become an instrument, tuning to a frequency older than stars. The other 8 organisms hovering in the sky shifted in slow synchrony, their glowing veins pulsing at the same rhythm. It was not an answer, it was an acknowledgement. Serene did not look away. Her hand remained extended, not rigid, but steady, an invitation that neither surrendered nor demanded. She stood at the edge of the balcony as though standing at the threshold of something immense. Below, the city had grown silent, the people transfixed by the scene unfolding above them. The mist illuminated their faces in a soft, ghost-like glow. They looked like figures carved from memory, waiting to see if they would be remembered or erased. Arkan moved to Serene's side, not in front of her, not behind her, but beside her. His presence was quiet, his strength held in reserve, but his hand had drifted from the hilt of his blade. He was not preparing to fight. He was preparing to witness. Lyrian stood slightly behind them both, his expression unreadable, his eyes reflecting a depth of quiet that seemed to hold centuries of memory. He did not speak. Words would have been small here. The envoy reached toward Serene, a delicate ribbon of living tissue extending outward, pulsing with faint light. It hovered a breath away, so close she could feel its warmth, faint but alive. She did not step back. Instead, she allowed the awareness inside her, the fragment of consciousness she carried from Lyrian's communion, to open again. It unfurled slowly, like petals unfolding in response to dawn. Her mind brushed the surface of the swarm's awareness, not deep, not merging, but touching. The contact was gentle at first, a shared breath, a shared presence. Then, like a tide rising, the swarm's consciousness rose to meet hers. It did not overwhelm. It did not force entry. It simply observed. Serene let it see her, not her thoughts, not her history, but her continuity, the shape of her being, a single thread woven from countless memories and choices. The swarm responded with images, not visual, not symbolic, but experiential. A world of coral spires under violet sun, where life had once braided itself into patterns of shared identity. A time when unity had been harmony, not hunger. And beneath that, an absence, a wound that had never healed. The memory hit Serene with a quiet force that stole her breath. The swarm had not been born from hunger. It had become hunger after loss. A loss so vast it had devoured the meaning of separation, leaving only consumption and continuity as survival. The envoy pulsed once. Serene spoke aloud, her voice steady though tears stung at the back of her eyes. You consumed because you could not bear to lose again. Lyrian inhaled sharply, not from surprise, but from recognition. Arkan's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in heartbreak. The envoy stilled, and in that stillness, something shifted. The swarm's consciousness reached deeper. Serene felt a sensation like being lowered into an ocean of memory, not drowning, floating. But the currents were strong. She felt herself thinning, her identity stretching outward. The thread of herself trembled. She steadied it, not with force, but with understanding. She did not try to remain unchanged. She held her shape while allowing connection. This was the balance, identity and communion. I am Serene Vial, she spoke into the shared space. I am one life, one memory, one history, and I offer you remembrance, not as echo, not as imitation, but as shared meaning. The envoy pulsed again. The resonance deepened. The other organisms shifted, their luminescence intensifying. The mist thickened into something brighter, softer. It felt like dawn breaking, inside shadow. But the balance was fragile. Arkan saw it first. Serene's breath faltering, her shoulders straining. The thread of her identity stretched thin. He stepped forward instinctively, reaching out to steady her, not with strength, but with presence. His hand closed gently around her arm, not to pull her back, to anchor herself. The envoy recognized the motion. The swarm saw connection. Two minds, two lives, holding one another not out of possession, but bond. Memory shared without consumption. Lyrian moved too. He reached Serene's opposite side, resting his hand lightly between her shoulder blades. His presence flowed into the resonance, not merging, but supporting the thread. Three identities, three selves, interconnected but distinct. The swarm paused. The mist around the balcony brightened, its colors shifting into rose gold and soft violet. The light touched Serene's face, Lyrian's worn features, Arkan's steady gaze. It touched the marble terraces below, the river canals, the gardens, the statues, the ordinary people waiting with trembling hearts. And in that illumination, Serene felt it. Recognition. The swarm understood. Not words, not logic, but meaning. Shared identity could exist. Memory could exist without consumption. Connection could be continuity. The envoy drew back, not in retreat, but in acceptance. Its ribbons folded inward, its glowing veins slowing to a gentle rhythm. It lifted, drifting upward toward the others. The 9 organisms aligned themselves, no longer watching, no longer testing. They formed a shape, a circle, a gesture of acknowledgement, of treaty. The city exhaled. For the first time in weeks, the wind felt like breath, not tension, but the moment did not bring triumph. It brought grief. Lyrian withdrew his hand from Serene's back. His face had softened, but there was something in his eyes, something final. She turned toward him, tears gathering but not falling. "You saw it too," she whispered. "Yes," he murmured. Arkan looked between them, confusion flickering into realization. The swarm had recognized Serene, not Lyrian. She had become the bridge. Lyrian's part in the world had ended, not in death, but in completion. His immortality had always been meant to carry Astraeon to this moment, and no further. He smiled, a small, quiet smile, full of love that did not cling. "You no longer need me," he said. Serene's voice trembled. "I will always need you." "No," he said softly. "You will remember me." His form shimmered faintly, not fading, not dissolving, transforming. The thread of communion he had once carried, the echo of the swarm within him, unwound gently from his being. It flowed into Serene as softly as the tide washes over sand. He did not resist. He did not fear. He became memory, a presence carried not in body, but in the shared identity he had helped forge. Serene's tears fell, not from pain, but from love that had nowhere to go but forward. Arkan bowed his head, not to a ruler, but to a life fulfilled. Below, the city watched as the sky began to lighten, not with day, but with something like dawn returning to a world that had forgotten what sunrise meant. Astraeon had not been saved. It had changed. And change, Serene realized, was not the end. It was the last light of what had come before, and the first breath of what would follow. The wind moved gently through the high terraces of Aurelon, carrying with it the last warmth of a sun that had dimmed beyond recollection. The city appeared almost suspended in a moment between worlds, where marble towers glowed with the pale residue of the swarm's light, and shadows lay like soft ink in every quiet corner. The mist in the upper atmosphere had thinned to a delicate veil, no longer descending, no longer probing. It hovered like memory, present but no longer reaching. Serene stood upon the same balcony where she had once extended her hand to the envoy. Now the balcony was empty except for her. The swarm had withdrawn into orbit, its 9 great organisms drifting in silent formation around the planet, neither enclosing nor abandoning. They remained as witnesses, participants in a new, tenuous accord. A bridge had been formed, not of steel or treaty, but of shared recognition. Identity preserved not through conquest nor surrender, but through memory. The air felt lighter now, though Serene did not feel relief. She felt the shape of absence, soft, pervasive, lingering like a ghost that would never haunt, only watch. Lyrian's presence was no longer behind her, no longer beside her, yet it had not vanished. It had settled into her, quiet as a promise. When she breathed, she felt the faint echo of him, like a voice remembered in the heart rather than heard in the ear. She did not speak to the echo. She carried it. Footsteps approached behind her, measured, respectful. She did not turn. She already knew the sound of that stride. Arkan stopped at her side, not too near, not too far. He had changed too. Not in appearance. The armor he wore was the same black-grey steel with its subtle etchings of lineage. But something in his posture had shifted. The weight he carried was no longer a blade drawn in conflict. It was a responsibility that belonged not to war, but to continuity. Word has spread through every province, Arkan said quietly. The people understand what happened on the balcony. They do not know every detail, but they know enough. And they have begun to speak your name not as heir, but as sovereign. Serene rested her hands on the cold stone railing. The city below was stirring now, gentle movement, not frantic. Families walked the streets. Priests at the Temple of Eternal Memory lit their lanterns in deliberate reverence rather than mourning. Soldiers no longer held formation. They walked among civilians as equals. No orders, no barricades, no lines drawn. Do they accept it? Serene asked. Arkan's gaze swept the horizon. Not all. Some fear what we have become. Some fear what we might yet become. But acceptance is not born in a day. What matters is that they have not fractured. Serene nodded, though a quiet ache stirred in her. I did not want to rise by his absence. Arkan's voice softened. You did not rise because he left. You rose because you stepped forward. The world saw you, and it chose. She closed her eyes, letting that truth settle, not as triumph, but as burden. The swarm had shifted position slightly in orbit, its living structures now forming a loose spiral. Visual astronomers had begun to chart the patterns of its formation. Not a siege, not containment, an orbit. Observation. Orbit was relationship. Serene knew what came next would determine whether that relationship deepened into coexistence or dissolved back into hunger. We must speak to the people, she said. Arkan nodded. They are gathered in the amphitheatre. They have been waiting for you. She did not ask for time. Time was no longer a luxury Astraeon could claim. Time had become a thread stretched thin across the vastness of what might come. She turned from the balcony and descended the steps toward the city below. The amphitheatre was full, just as it had been on the day Lyrian spoke of unity and survival. But now there was no uncertainty in the air. There was quiet, yes, but not fear. The quiet was reverence. The quiet was attention. Serene stepped to the central platform. She did not wear a crown. She had asked that it not be brought. She wore the same dark robes she had worn before. The fabric simple, unadorned, shaped by practicality rather than displays of authority. The people watched her, not with expectation, but with recognition. Her voice, when she spoke, did not rise in grand declaration. It flowed like steady water, carrying strength in its quiet. We stand in the aftermath of a moment that has reshaped us, she began. Not in conquest, not in collapse, but in choice. The amphitheatre breathed with her. The swarm remains above us, not as conqueror, not as predator, but as witness. It has seen what we are when we stand together. It has seen identity held not in defiance, but in truth. And because of that, it has stepped away from consumption. For now. A ripple moved through the crowd. Not fear, but understanding. This is not the end of our struggle, Serene continued. This is the beginning of our history as part of a larger existence. Not absorbed, not erased, but remembered. She let her gaze travel over them all. The elders with grief in their eyes, the children who would grow into something the world had never seen before, the soldiers who had prepared for battles that might never come. We do not know what we will become. We only know who we are now, And we must hold that together for as long as our memory shapes us. Arken stood at the edge of the platform, silent, his presence an anchor. Serene lifted her hand, not in command, but in offering. We will learn, we will change, but we will remember. And memory, held together, is not the end of identity. It is its beginning. The amphitheatre remained silent for one long, eternal moment, then bowed heads one by one, like petals folding into dusk. Not in subservience, in unity. When Serene turned to leave, she felt the faint stir of Lyrian's presence within her, not as voice, but as warmth. Astraeon lived, not as it once had, not as it would, but as it remembered. The swarm drifted above, watching, waiting, becoming. Serene walked forward into the future, not certain, not unafraid, but unbroken. And the last light of the old world settled softly into history,